This is a true story. 5 experienced workers were doing routine pipeline work inside an underwater chamber. None of them thought this ordinary job would become the start of a nightmare. As they began loosening the screws, a disaster caused by a massive pressure difference exploded without warning. The moment the screw came loose, the pipeline unleashed a devastating suction. Tools, equipment, and the 5 men were instantly swallowed and dragged deep into the narrow, freezing pipe. That minute or so became the longest moment of their lives. They could feel their bodies scraping against the walls, hear the roar of water, but couldn't even cry out. When the suction finally stopped, they lay collapsed in the pipe, shaken. Luckily, they had stopped at a spot where the pipe bulged slightly, creating a small air pocket. That trapped air became their only hope. Once they caught their breath, they called out to each other. All 5 were there, but each had cuts and bruises. The worst injured was the second man. His leg was broken, he had passed out and was barely hanging on. Worse still, their oxygen tanks had been lost in the drag. With tight space and thinning air, they couldn't wait long for rescue. In this desperate situation, they pushed down their panic and figured out their only way to survive. Then a major disagreement came up. One man thought they had gone in head first, so they had to go back. But the other 4 were sure they had gone in feet first, so going forward was the way out. In the pitch-black, life-or-death moment, they went with the majority. With no light, they moved one after another, pushing each other along the narrow pipe like a long centipede. This way, they could help push the injured man forward and keep everyone together. As they struggled forward, they found 2 oxygen tanks that had been sucked in with them. That should have been a glimmer of hope, but it quickly turned worse. The pipe ahead was completely flooded. To keep going, they'd have to dive in. 2 tanks for 5 people were barely enough, and they had no idea how long the underwater pipe was or where it led. Once they went under, there was no turning back. There was another problem they couldn't solve: the man with the broken leg. In the dry pipe, he could barely move. Underwater, there was no way. And since he was second in line, the others couldn't get past him. Stuck between a rock and a hard place, Chris stepped up. He made the bravest and most heartbreaking decision: to go ahead alone with 1 oxygen tank to scout the way. He promised that if he made it out, he would get help and come back. If he didn't return, they'd know something had happened. His teammates tearfully agreed. Chris didn't know if he was going the right way, but he had no choice. Moving forward was harder than he imagined. Freezing water surrounded him, the pipe was too narrow to stretch, and he could only crawl inch by inch. After what felt like forever, Chris found another bulge with a bit of trapped air. He took a few breaths, then went back underwater without hesitation. That time, he felt true despair. It was pitch black, the pipe seemed endless, his body was completely drained, and with years of diving experience, Chris knew his oxygen tank was almost empty. Exhaustion and hopelessness kept wearing him down. He wanted to give up, to just sink and end the suffering. Just as he was about to break, he heard a sharp metallic clang ahead. He reached out with all his strength and touched another oxygen tank. It was a miracle. Chris let out a long sigh, shoved the nearly empty tank behind him, and didn't hesitate. Even though the new tank had no mouthpiece and the air reeked of petroleum, he put it to his mouth and pushed on. The fresh oxygen gave him new hope. After another exhausting crawl of nearly an hour, Chris finally reached the vertical pipe. At that moment, he was both excited and terrified. What if this was a dead end? What if he had crawled to the wrong side? Life or death came down to this one moment. With everything he had, Chris swam upward. When he broke through the darkness and saw that ray of light, all his exhaustion and fear disappeared. Even though an empty section of pipe still blocked him from getting out right away, a smile of relief crossed his face. He screamed at the top of his lungs, his voice hoarse but full of hope. Soon, a head appeared. It was a co-worker on the boat who had come down to check when he saw no movement from them. He found Chris calling for help. Chris was saved, but his heart was still down there with his 4 companions. As soon as he was safe, he told everyone what was happening and begged them to start the rescue immediately. By then, Chris was in terrible shape, covered in injuries and suffering from oxygen poisoning, and was rushed to the ICU. The next day, Chris woke up and learned something unbelievable. The oil company hadn't sent anyone down to rescue them. Their excuse was that the 4 men were beyond saving. They said the oxygen tanks would have only lasted about an hour, so a rescue was pointless. But the truth was, divers had already gone down to the pipe and knocked on the walls, and clear knocks came back. That was a sign of life, a signal from 4 desperate people waiting in the dark. Even with that hard evidence, the company still didn't act. They changed their story, saying they didn't have the right equipment for a rescue. That was when Chris realized the cold truth. This heartless company never intended to save those 4 lives. A rescue would mean dismantling pipes, replacing parts. It would cost too much. To them, saving the equipment was worth more than saving 4 people. When Chris found out, he was overwhelmed with rage, grief, and disbelief. He tried to get out of the hospital to fight for his friends, but people held him down and gave him sedatives. He was stuck in that bed, watching the hours tick by, knowing that deep under the sea, his friends were running out of time. On the 4th day, divers still heard knocking from inside the pipe. Those 4 men, through sheer willpower, had survived 4 days in the dark, struggling to breathe, injured and exhausted. But by the 5th day, there was no more sound. In the end, they never got the rescue they should have had. In that cold, dark pipe, they lost their lives. After Chris got out of the hospital, he took that heartless oil company to court, driven by grief and rage. He wanted justice for his 4 friends. He wanted those who ignored their lives to face the full force of the law.